Hello, welcome to class. It's good to have you back, and though I can't see you, I hope we are getting to know one another just a little bit this way, me knowing you through your writings and you at least through these videos and my comments back to you. Chapter 5 is on tap today in our organizational communication class. Chapter 5 is all about culture in organizations. What is a culture? Let's kind of start there. Every nation has a culture. We kind of know that, but culture is something we take for granted. If you were to describe what is American culture, what is Mexican culture, could you do that? It's a set of rules about how to live your life. And culture involves language, it involves religion. Religion is a symbolically compacted form of culture. And all of the symbols and rituals we have in our religious practice reflect and reinforce culture. And so culture's complex, it's complicated, and we live and breathe it every day, and it's really hard for a fish to describe what water is, what the ocean is all about. We just live our lives within this culture. And we also have subcultures, and this is where we start to notice differences between you and me. I don't have tattoos and piercings, I don't dress all in black. I am not part of that subculture. There are even subcultures. I am still a member of a union, and within that union we have other groups that are even more radicalized members, the ones that have the commit the violent acts even during protests. And even within that group there are probably some even more radical people as part of a smaller group. We have these subcultures and subcultures, and a lot of anthropologists really don't even like the term subculture at all. The point is, everybody has a set of rules they live by within a group when you're part of that group. Organizations are no different, and that's what this chapter is about. Every organization has a culture, whether they like it or not, whether it was created intentionally or not, they have one. Here you've seen examples. Here's Dilbert, here's the mean boss yelling at people. Here's Michael from The Office, very different kind of culture in that office. I once walked in to get my car registration redone, and those government offices have their own culture also, don't they? And it's all about being fast and customer service oriented and getting you in and out the door with what you need. No, it's not, is it? In fact, this place was extremely slow, and there was a woman, the boss, and she walked back and forth behind the line of windows with employees working there, with her hands behind her back, literally like a Nazi officer in World War II. She didn't have a stick back there to whack people with or anything, but just a grimace, the look on her face was one that said, I want nothing to do with working in a place like this that has a boss like that. So every cultural organization, exhibits a culture. We perform culture. It's not that we have one. Think of more of we perform it, and we all fall into our roles and our places. Not unlike a play with a script, and every play has a different script, and the players have to perform the roles of those people in character. We do that when we go to work. We even switch when we get home. We switch with when we're ever different groups of friends, and there are some sociologists that say we could be as part of as many as played 80 different roles in our not day-to-day life, but week to week, month to month, and we really run into a problem when the wrong role runs into the wrong person out there. These can be seen also as living within different various cultures, that we have a foot in each one. It gets complicated, worthy of a lot of thought, but what you don't want to do is think of yourself as, oh, that doesn't affect me. No, we live and breathe it. Okay, cultures are constructed symbolically for the most part. That's the simplest way to transfer it, is to transfer the symbols. A good example, my favorite, is the Greek culture. And the Greek culture had its primary means of transmission from group to group, and that's probably why we know so much about them today. It was from two works, the Iliad and the Odyssey. And this, of course, is an image from Brad Pitt's version of the movie Troy. The Iliad is all about the Trojan War. The Odyssey is all about Odysseus, the hero of that war, getting home and taking 10 years to do it. No, 20 years to get home, right? 10 years of war, 10 years to get home. But within the Iliad and the Odyssey are stories. It's filled with metaphors. It describes the rituals, but these stories taught people the right way to be Greek, or Achaean in their language. And you listen to those stories. They weren't written down. Oral bards roamed around the countryside and came to village and performed these, actually reciting these epic poems in their entirety. You know, you can do that with poetry. The memory is an amazing thing, especially when your brain's not cluttered up with everything else. But they would perform these sometime about 800 BC, 500 BC. It got written down after the Greeks began using a phonetic alphabet for their language, and we know so much about Greek culture today because of these epic poems, stories of their heroes. Cultures have metaphors, technology. Just a cell phone can become a metaphor for modern technology. It's actually a synecdoche part of it also. We have rituals. An organization can do this. We have rituals in our nation. We have holidays we celebrate. Those are rituals. We have birth rituals, marriage rituals, burial rituals. We follow them pretty closely, and they really don't change that much. And if you look back at older ways we perform them, often it's very interesting and insightful, and we realize we have lost a little piece of our culture somewhere along the way. We have stories in this culture, stories about people that did things right, heroes. We have inventors, entrepreneurs. They may be some of our most favorite. Successful entrepreneurs that went out in the face of all odds and overcame and were successful and are now wealthy and living the life. That's the goal set out there for us to achieve. We have symbols of those goals in terms of what kind of car you have or the name on your clothes, which just shows how much you paid for clothes that, probably higher quality, look a little nicer, but don't want to get off into a rant on commercialism here. We do have artifacts as well that exhibit our culture, our yard of our house, on the street we live in. Do you decorate your yard? Do you just keep it immaculate? Yeah, it's a picture of the inner turmoil of your brain, of course, but just the fact that we expect one another to keep these yards looking nice, looking like we're all successful on the block. We have heroes and heroines in culture, and let me try to play a video for you here. It shows a different kind of hero than perhaps we're accustomed to. We've got no sound. Rock music playing right now. Slow motion. You'll get this in a sec. Heroes can be different in different kinds of cultures. Our rock stars are not like your rock stars. And good. The sound was off and we didn't have to hear their theme song at the end. And we will try to get back to our slides now. Sorry about that. So we do have heroes we look at, heroes of different kinds. I mentioned I was a member of the Electricians Union. I don't know that we really had heroes there. We had older members we looked up to and admired. It was a much more communistic organization, and the heroes were us, the people, the workers, and the symbol of the guy in the hard hat, the fist holding electrical lightning bolts, were all part of our culture there. Performances. We perform culture. I've mentioned this already. It's a role. It's kind of like being in character if you're a player on stage. And different kinds of characters, but if you're performing Shakespeare, everybody's set in a time and a place, in a certain way of dress, and we perform those roles. And those performances really don't change much, but they can change according to your role in the organization. Cultures have values. The American culture, what are those values? Independence, rugged individualism, honesty, integrity, all of these things we hold dear. A lot of that's disappearing, of course, in our culture with corruption rampant almost everywhere you look. But even those people want the appearance of being honest and having integrity. They know they're corrupt, they know they're breaking the law, but they sure don't want anybody else to be able to point that out. Why would we use a cultural approach for analyzing organizations, or even we could call this another approach to structuring an organization, just like classical management, the machine approach, human relations, valuing people, human resources, increasing the abilities of your people and making sure their lives are self-actualized so that productivity rises. The systems approach that recognizes the complexity and tries to provide a framework for us to deal with that. Cultural approach can be overlaid on top of this, perhaps. We call it cultural perspectives. I think in the textbook I changed that term to approach, I believe, here. But why do we do this? Well, one is competition. Competition brings change. And in the 1980s, the book talks about Japanese manufacturing really not just giving American companies a run for their money, but putting most of them out of business. My last year of college at Arizona State, I sold appliances at a well-known appliance store in the valley. There were no American-made television sets in that store. Everything was from overseas. The American manufacturers like Magnavox, RCA, out of business, gone forever. But those were the only TVs you could buy in the 1960s when I was a kid, even the 1970s. And then Sony made its introduction, Panasonic, and they had superior products to the American products, hands down. And they drove the American companies out of business because they were more productive, they could sell the televisions cheaper, and they were higher quality. Initially, not so much, but as the decade passed, through the 80s, their products became higher quality. No American-made camcorders, no American-made anything. Okay, so competition drives this change. And what people discovered, they looked at the Japanese and said, how come they're so successful? Well, they have a different culture. Their culture was different. Their organizational culture was different. And we wanted to copy that here in the United States. We wanted to grasp that so we can be competitive again. We've had varying degrees of success doing that. The book tells a wonderful little anecdote about the author, one of the authors of the text, being called up on the phone and saying, hey, I'd like to hire you as an consultant. I want you to install a culture in my organization. Well, it already has one. It's not like there wasn't one. It already had a culture. That culture had rules and rituals and even heroes and artifacts and values and ethics. It was already there. So I'm going to say no, you can't install a culture. You can begin to change the culture. We'll talk about that a little bit further. This cultural approach also brought just a new lens for looking at organizations and how organizations really function. And it wasn't a scientific lens that looked at inputs and outputs and processes and mathematically calculated the most profitable way to do everything. It was an interpretive lens, an interpretive one, recognizing we're working with people, we're working with living beings, we're working with something that is much more akin to a biological system. And the scientific approach just doesn't help us get a handle on it to explain, predict, and control the way scientific managers would want. But the interpretive approach does begin to give us a handle. How can we help our employees to become more effective, more profitable for the company? Well, by shaping the culture, not installing one, by shaping it into a place where good, high-quality work and productive work is rewarded and appreciated, and the idea of teamwork, a collective culture where everybody works together and understands their part and knows they're contributing to the whole and nobody's more important than another. The interpretive approach allowed us to get a handle on these ideas and began to implement them into organizations. Okay, 3 approaches to understanding culture are explained by the book in the latter stages of the chapter. This practical approach to culture. And this approach has a bias for action. And it wants the organization to act, to move forward, to do things. I like the image of people jumping off the cliff here. Taking action in a very real and tangible way is a value here that we have in corporate America, in organizational America, where every organization has goals and is trying to do things. We want closer relations with our customer, with our what's the PR term? With our the groups that pay attention to us. I can't remember the exact term now. You PR students know what I'm talking about. We want closer relations with them. We want, in this practical approach to culture, we want productivity out of, autonomy out of people. We want, you are an individual still, we understand that, but out of that, we want your entrepreneurship, your ideas, your creativity. We value that. Productivity, we recognize now, comes through people. Yes, you do need a good system in place. It is probably very mechanized at some level. Just your system for filling out forms in an organization needs to be as efficient as possible. Yet the productivity comes through the people. Some years ago, right after I hired into Indiana University, I just got frustrated with our advising forms. I was doing student advising with the communication majors. And so I redesigned the form on a spreadsheet instead of Microsoft Word and filling it out by hand. And on the spreadsheet, we could type in the names of classes. You know, the little boxes would pop up and you just select the class, put in the hours, a 3-hour class, and the sheet added up your hours. You knew exactly where you were. Every time we advised somebody, we put in their hours, and we had a new total and knew how close they were to graduating. We had sections and became very efficient. And I shared this with the dean of our college, and he adopted it for the entire college. And then some years later, I found that other colleges within the university were using that same form. It was a productive improvement in the system, the mechanized part of the system, but it was implemented through people that still had to sit down and fill this thing out. And it helped people be more productive, actually, and saved frustration within people, because frustration leads to inaction and not being productive. We like a hands-on in organizations, a hands-on approach to things. We're value-driven. I like this phrase here: stick to the knitting. Do what you do best. There's a number of phrases that say the same thing. Do what you do best, and don't stray too far away from that. Organizations run into problems when they start a new branch or start doing some new department that we're going to do our own work here rather than subbing it out, and they don't do it very well. Often organizations will acquire another corporation that can handle that for them. This idea of loose and tight properties gets at that these values of creativity and constraint in communication. We want the creativity, but we've got to have a framework. We want loose rules in the organization that do not impede creativity, yet we want these rules to be tight enough. You can't sit around all day long thinking up of great ideas on how to do things better. You have to get out there and do them, put them into practice, and get the members of your organizational culture performing in this way. Another approach to culture is known as the interpretive approach. And remember, these are all kind of happening simultaneously. I'm not saying pick one here. The interpretive approach says that this culture, it evolves naturally. You just have one. That's why I said every organization has a culture. You can't install it. It's difficult to even manage the culture. A boss comes in to work, a new boss, and says, we're changing things around here. We're going to be like this from now on. Well, that typically doesn't work too well, but it can work. And it can work with time and with commitment and with a boss that's not just going to jump ship and go to another corporation within 6 months, but somebody that's going to stick around. And as new employees cycle into the organization, they buy into that type of culture. That's what they're enculturated into. Yeah, they still see some cynicism in the older employees that want to do things the old way, but they get frustrated and leave perhaps, some retire, and over a course of, let's say, years, a culture can change. Structuration theory is a mechanism that really explains this best, and there's a little image here showing a cyclical through time pattern of organizational life. And as we bring action into this, we force change, we try to impact, we try to exert change upon an organization, it begins to take effect. And as the next year, as we continue to do the same things or continue to change practices that are generated out of one important idea, like building the best quality product we can make, and continuing to emphasize that year after year in your guitar factory, buying quality materials to make, letting go people that are doing shoddy work, and reinforcing positively the people that are doing good high quality work. Yeah, it will change. You can change an organization. I think this happened with a lot of Japanese products. In the 70s and the 60s, Japanese meant cheap. Yet by the late 70s and 80s, Japanese products were of the higher quality, and that cheap idea sloughed off after a couple of decades. Change over time does happen due to outside forces and the cyclical nature of organizational life that allows that change to be reinforced year after year. New people coming in, things can change. Finally, here the critical and postmodern view of culture is one that has three key ideas here. Postmodern means, let's just say, after the failure of science. It's a way to put it. After the failure of many things in our past that led us up to World War II and nuclear holocaust and the disasters that modernization, the whole modern era, turned us into a very destructive, warlike society. We're not quite past that yet. We do not live in a wonderful world of peace. But the postmodern theorists look at all this and say, we've got to get past that. Science isn't all that great. Mary Shelley wrote the book Frankenstein, and it was her warning to us of science run amok and what can really happen when scientists go places that they shouldn't go and start doing things just because we can. Artificial intelligence, that's the latest thing people are writing books and movies about. Have we seen one of those stories yet where we really like how improved artificial intelligence has made the world? A lot of concern there in the minds of our artists. So this postmodern view that says, science isn't so great. We invented really good ways to kill people alongside of all the wonderful stuff, and we need to back up and maybe get back to a different approach here. This postmodern view values an integration of all sorts of parts, and I've got just an image. The best way I can explain it maybe is this image. It's a painting done by my sister, pictured there, and it's a mosaic type painting, and all her paintings are like this, but I think somehow in her artistic soul she's caught on to this, that organizations, societies, cultures, communities are made up of individual parts that are all unique. This is all hand drawn out. She doesn't use any kind of computer imaging here, and so everything has its own little variations due to the irregularity of the artist's hand in repeating different shapes. Yet within each shape she has different patterns, yet the patterns are made up of similar shapes within them, and they form a pattern as a whole. And I just like this as a nice image of the modern world, a modern organization, something tightly knit, put together, everything in its place, yet a lot of variability and individualism and uniqueness in here. It's well integrated, yet at the same time there's a lot of differentiation between parts. This is more of a postmodern view, and I think in this case it's a lot more accurate at describing it, getting a handle on how are organizations structured, how are groups of people working towards common goals and different goals, but put together in the same space, yet sometimes spaced very far apart. How do they work together and create something out of the synergy of all of their efforts? Final idea here on this postmodern view of culture is the idea of fragmentation. Not that we get fragmented and all broken apart, the kind of fragmentation that, and I may even be disagreeing with the book here, humans have a tendency to try to shortcut things. And so we take a fragment of a larger thing, we look at the puzzle piece and we say, I've got it figured out. As we mature, we pick up some other fragments and say, oh, this is a little more complicated than I thought, but I've got it figured out now. Oh, here's some more pieces. Now I've got it figured out. It's just this tendency we have. It can be manipulated, or we can be manipulated by it when we're only presented selected fragments of something. This is back to that strategic control communication model. We're only shown pieces, and those pieces are actually maybe distorted for our viewing pleasure. The advertising industry might do quite a bit of this, showing only one side of a product. I got it, I like that product, it will make me look cool smoking those cigarettes. And yet the effects to our health are not so cool 20 years down the road. So fragmentation is an important concept in the postmodern world that we live in. And a lot of it's because we just can't cognitively attend to everything that's out there all the time. We have to deal with fragments and look at a piece of something, look at one message that comes through the media about, let's say, the election or a candidate's stance on something and say, I have a handle on who this candidate is now. No, everybody's more complex than that. But that's sometimes the best we can do, just because of the limitations of the human mind and the limitations of time, pressure, stress, and everything else we're responsible to do. Okay, this cultural approach finally here, here's just some 4 final ideas on this. An anticipatory socialization. You hire into an organization, we are anticipating that you will be properly socialized, enculturated into this organization. At age 18, that's pretty easy. At age 23, right out of college with a degree, you've already started to be enculturated by the people that gave you your major classes, who are immersed in that culture of whatever field that is. And so you enculturate in, you socialize into it rather seamlessly many times. If you move from one employer to another within the same field, that socialization can be more seamless. And accountants' jobs are similar at every organization you may work at. Where you run into problems is when you do the radical career change at age 35, like I did, going from the electrical field to deciding to become a teacher and going to graduate school and having to learn to code switch and speak with one-syllable words at work, and then go to night classes and trying to improve my vocabulary and having lists of words on my desk that I was trying to learn the meanings of and actually start using in conversation. Found it even more interesting as I got into a PhD program, and my brain was getting pretty well trained by that time. My vocabulary had grown a lot, and I would go work, especially I remember one summer teaching in the morning at 7 a.m., a morning class, getting permission from my boss to show up at work at 8:30, an hour and a half late, and stay an hour and a half over in the evenings. And turning back into the electrician after being the teacher as a third-year PhD student. And then going back out on the job site and having to dumb down my vocabulary, literally in my van, change out of my nice slacks into my jeans and my work shirt, and then step out onto the job site. It was a very interesting summer and really put this the idea of two cultures and having to jump back and forth between them. And it can be difficult when you do that career change, because now you have to enculturate into a new world, and I had to enculturate into academia. Having a father who was a teacher, an artist, a professor made that easier, but it was something that I consciously had to work on. So this socialization here, let's just jump down to this idea of high reliability organizations. Important thing here, when you go from something like electrical work, I would call that a high reliability organization, a high reliability career. You have to do things right or the lights don't go on. If you really screw things up, the sparks fly, things burn down, electrical equipment burns up, and many of the older fellows in the trade that I worked with had scars from getting shocked, getting hung up, getting sparks blowing up and getting burned. Most electricians get burned in the worst accidents, burned by sparks of melting metal right in front of you 2 feet away. And I've been shocked by 480 volts. It just knocked me on my butt. And high reliability, you don't want to get killed there. And you want to create equipment and an environment and a building and walk away and the lights work, the plugs work, everything works the way it should. Air traffic controllers, very high reliability. Nuclear power plant operators, we talked about this a bit in the last lecture. But there are these organizations where, you just can't make mistakes. You have to double check your work. You have to find those mistakes before the finished product gets to your customer. Low reliability, teaching? I don't know, I really, it's a lot looser here. I need to show up. I need to have these video lectures recorded in time for you to watch them. I can make mistakes, and I often do as I'm speaking to you. I even may say something that disagrees with the book. And it sort of works, because I'm throwing way more out there on the desk than you can really take in and capture every bit of it. Now, some of my colleagues in other departments, it may be a little different, but here in a communication course, I'm after main ideas and theories here. So what I'm really concerned that you're getting from this class is not nearly as detailed, and nobody's life depends on it. It doesn't make us a low reliability culture here within the communication department, but the stakes are not quite as high. Unless you don't get important ideas from the nonverbal class, from the conflict and mediation class, and you end up missing all the signs in your marriage that things are falling apart, and then you don't know how to mediate and how to work and repair the conflicts that you're having. So some aspects of what we do are very important and maybe could start getting back towards a high reliability situation. Socialization is also affected by technology. Cultural change is affected by technology. Just new ways of communicating is the one aspect of it you're well familiar with. The data that's available now, the ease of doing research. The last real research study I wrote up a few years ago, I've really been confined to teaching here at NAU, I was able to write up in 2 days something that would have been your publishable in a journal, something a graduate student would have worked on for an entire semester, yet higher quality than that. With computers now, I was able to write up in 2 days, in part because I was an expert in the area, but also in part I could look up every citation I needed on the computer, and I didn't have to go to the library. I used to pride myself on being able to go to the Syracuse University Library. It took me 5 minutes to walk there from the department. I could go in the door, get what I wanted in 10 minutes, and be walking back to my office. And but with computers, my goodness, you can just look it up. The data that's available to us is just amazing today. And that changes a culture, that changes an organization. So be aware of that. Sometimes it's easier for the youth to enculturate into that as you are going through college, and some of you are going into research careers. And you never had to deal with libraries much. In fact, I bet some of you haven't stepped into Klein Library here on campus. Okay, I think that does it for us. Thanks a lot for watching. Just keep in mind, organizations have a culture. It's based in American culture, or even corporate culture, if you want to call it, which is becoming more internationalized, but it's there, and every organization has its own variations and flavors on it, depending on the goals of the organization and the nature of its leaders. So be aware of that, be watching for it, and as you take positions in new organizations, enculturate, accept it, embrace it, and that's the way you're going to fit into that company, is by embracing its culture. Okay, thanks a lot for watching. We'll talk to you later.